record button on my document camera. Okay, so perambulate is just a fancy word for to walk. So they're like walking skeletons. There were 7 altogether, including him, and now remember, Buck is the lead of the team. In their very great misery, they had become insensible to the bite of the lash or the bruise of the club. The pain of the beating was distant, dull and distant, just as the things their eyes saw and their ears heard seemed dull and distant. They were not half living or quarter living. They were simply so many bags of bones in which sparks of life fluttered faintly. So the reason they're bags of bones is that their new owners don't feed them very much. You know, they're out there in the cold, so the dogs, as well as the people, need a lot of calories. Well, this new group of people did not come prepared with the amount of food they would need. So that's why the dogs are now bags of bones. When a halt was made, they dropped down in the traces like dead dogs, and the spark dimmed and paled and seemed to go out. And when the club or whip fell upon them, the spark fluttered feebly up, and they tottered to their feet and staggered on. Then came a day when Billy, the good-natured, fell and could not rise. Hal had traded off his revolver, so he took the axe and knocked Billy on the head as he lay in the traces, then cut the carcass out of the harness and dragged it to one side. So in Dave's death, there was at least some dignity. They allowed Dave to continue to work until the last possible moment. They made sure the other dogs didn't see him die. But Hal is not that kind of man. Buck saw and his mate saw, and they knew that this thing was very close to them. What does that mean when he says, this thing? What is the thing that's very close to them? It's not a physical thing. What did you say, Brady? Dying, exactly. Death. Death is very close to them. On the next day, Kuna went, and but 5 of them remained. Joe, too far gone to be malignant. Pike, crippled and limping, only half conscious, and not conscious enough longer to malinger. Solix, the one-eyed, still faithful to the toil of trace and trail and mournful in what he had so little strength with which to pull. Teek, who had not traveled so far that winter, and who was now beaten more than the others because he was fresher. And Buck, still at the head of the team, but no longer enforcing discipline or striving to enforce it. Blind with weakness half the time, and keeping the trail by the loom of it and by the dim feel of his feet. It was beautiful spring weather. So in this paragraph, you're going to see a tone of hope. There's a change in season, and you're going to feel like things should be getting better. But you have that contrast, kind of like in that article we annotated the first week of school. But neither dogs nor humans were aware of it. Each day the sun rose earlier and set later. It was dawn by 3 in the morning, and twilight lingered until 9 at night. The whole long day was a blaze of sunshine. The ghostly winter silence had given way to the great spring murmur of awakening life. The murmur arose from all the land, fraught with joy of living. It came from the things that lived and moved again, things which had been as dead and which had not moved during the long months of frost. The sap was rising in the pines, the willows and aspens were bursting out in young buds, shrubs and vines were putting on fresh garbs of green. Crickets sang in the nights and in the days, all manner of creeping, crawling things rustled forth into the sun. Partridges and woodpeckers were booming and knocking in the forest, squirrels were chattering, birds singing, and overhead honked the wild fowl driving up from the south in cunning wedges that split the air. So you have this contrast here. Spring is here. That's a sign of hope, new life, but they're living still in this very dark reality. From every hill slope came the trickle of running water, the music of unseen fountains. All things were thawing, bending, snapping. The Yukon was straining to break loose the ice that bound it down. It ate away from beneath. The sun ate from above. Air holes formed, fissures sprang and spread apart, while thin sections of ice fell through bodily into the river. And amid all this bursting, rending, throbbing of awakening life, under the blazing sun and through the soft sighing breezes like wayfarers to death, staggered the two men, the woman, and the huskies. While with the dogs falling, Mercedes is the wife, weeping and riding, Hal swearing innocuously, and Charles's eyes wistfully watering, they staggered into John Thornton's camp at the mouth of White River. When they halted, the dogs dropped down as though they had all been struck dead. Mercedes dried her eyes and looked at John Thornton. Charles sat down on a log to rest. He sat down very slowly and painstakingly because of his great stiffness. Hal did the talking. John Thornton was whittling the last touches of an axe handle he had made from a stick of birch. He whittled and listened, gave monosyllabic replies, and when it was asked, terse advice. He knew the breed, and he gave his advice in the certainty that it would not follow. So John Thornton is going to become very important to the remainder of the book. They told us up above that the bottom was dropping out of the trail, and that the best thing for us to do was to lay over, Hal said, in response to Thornton's warning to take no more chances on the rotten ice. They told us we couldn't make White River, and here we are, this last with a sneering ring of triumph in it. And they told you true, John Thornton answered. The bottom's likely to drop out at any moment. Only fools, with the blind luck of fools, could have made it. I tell you straight, I wouldn't risk my carcass on that ice for all the gold in Alaska. Remember, a lot of the people who are going north in search of gold, because this is during the gold rush time period. That's because you're not a fool, I suppose, said Hal. All the same, we'll go on to Dawson. He uncoiled his whip. Get up there, Buck. Get up there. Mush on. So John Thornton is telling them, you need to stay. Don't trust the ice. Spring is here. It's starting to melt. But Hal's saying, no, we're going to go on. Thornton went on whittling. It was idle, he knew, to go between a fool and his folly, while 2 or 3 fools, more or less, would not alter the scheme of things. So basically, in John Thornton's mind, all 3 of them are foolish. But the team did not get up at the command. It had long since passed into the stage where blows were required to rouse it. The whip flashed out here and there on its merciless errands. John Thornton compressed his lips. Solix was the first to crawl to his feet. Teek followed. Joe came next, yelping with pain. Pike made painful efforts. Twice he fell over, when half up, and on the 3rd attempt managed to rise. Buck made no effort. Now remember, Buck's the lead. If he doesn't get up, they're not going anywhere. He lay quietly where he had fallen. Troy, you with me? The lash bit into him again and again, but he neither whined nor struggled. Several times Thornton started as though to speak, but changed his mind. A moisture came into his eyes, and as the whipping continued, he arose and walked irresolutely up and down. So why is John Thornton kind of pacing at this point? Why would moisture come into his eyes? What's he sad about, James? You don't know? Well, what's happening to the dogs? They're getting harmed. They're giving up. They've been malnourished. They're tired. They're starving. And this whipping them is like torture. So even though John Thornton is a very quiet man, obviously there's a tender spot for animals. This was the first time Buck had failed, in itself a sufficient reason to drive Hal into a rage. He exchanged the whip for the customary club. So since Buck wouldn't get up, Hal goes and grabs the club. Buck refused to move under the rain of heavier blows which now fell upon him. Like his mates, he was barely able to get up, but unlike them, he made up his mind not to get up. So it wasn't necessarily that Buck couldn't get up, he was choosing not to. He had a vague feeling of impending doom. This had been strong upon him when he pulled into the bank, and it had not departed from him. What of the thin and rotten ice he had felt under his feet all day? It seemed that he sensed disaster close at hand. Out there, ahead on the ice, where his master was trying to drive him, he refused to stir. So greatly had he suffered, and so far gone was he, that the blows did not hurt much. And as they continued to fall upon him, the spark of life within flickered and went down. It was nearly out. He felt strangely numb. As though from a great distance, he was aware that he was being beaten. The last sensations of pain left him. He no longer felt anything, though very faintly he could hear the impact of the club upon his body. But it was no longer his body. It seemed so far away. So if you'll take out your chapter 5 conflict, and James, you'll get some more post-it notes tomorrow. We're going to focus on this quote that I highlighted. So, Buck's been a fighter this whole time. He's fought to stay alive. He fought for the lead position, and now he's done. His attitude kind of is, if I'm going to die, then I just need to go ahead and die, because he figures he's going to die if they continue on. So the quote that you're going to write here, Brady, do you have yours? This is the quote. And maybe for your picture that you'll draw on your post-it note, maybe you could draw like a dog. It can be a stick person dog and a club. And as they continued to fall, talking about being hit by the club, to fall upon him, the spark of life within, oh guys, you need my screen back on, don't you? Sorry, James, I had turned my screen off. They kind of need that on. Give it a second. It was nearly out. He felt strangely numb. So those of you in the room, you can't see that either. I don't know why I'm putting that under there. James, can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The spark of life within flickered and went down. It was nearly out. He felt strangely numb. And I just underlined that in red because I really like that imagery there. Let's see if I can. Turn the lights on and see if I can get it. So this is really man versus self or dog versus self. Buck's done fighting. He's fought this entire time, and now he's just done. So that spark of life was nearly out. He felt strangely numb. London, 86 with a period. And there may have been times in your life when you just keep, whether, maybe you've been physically injured or you have an illness or something and you just feel beaten down. You just become numb. Could be something emotional you go through. I think as humans we can relate to Buck at this point. So the summary for this section: Hal beats Buck when he does not get up to continue the trip to Dawson. And then the analysis. Although Buck has fought during this entire journey, his body is too exhausted to continue the fight. Buck gives up. Now, obviously, we have more to the book, so we know this isn't the end of the story. And John Thornton is going to become involved. So your task today is to read all of chapter 5. Make sure you get this done. Obviously, you're getting it done now. Tomorrow will be chapter 6. Now that one will be completely on your own. You pick whatever conflict you choose, and as you've seen, there are a lot of conflicts in every chapter, so there's not a right or wrong answer. Just make sure you're doing that sentence of summary of the scene, and then the sentence that analyzes why that scene, why that quote is important. And then on Thursday, we'll come back together and we'll meet about chapter 7. James, did you take the vocabulary quiz?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think you did really well, if I remember correctly. I didn't want to open up the answers and all that until after 4 p.m. today. So that's why it doesn't show you your score yet.
So I'm done for that.
Well, have you done Quill?
Yep.
Okay, you need to finish up, do 4 more Quill activities. That's what that activity pack, and make sure you read. You got to do your reading. Chapter 5. Because it gets pretty exciting after this.